Elizabeth Popeo, who is our faithful Q&A-er at each one of these and does it like a football coach. She's going to be running the chat for the Q&A at the end. Please don't do personal chats in the chat. Just ask the questions, because she last time was overwhelmed with personal chats back and forth and could not find the questions in the amount of people talking back and forth. So the chat is just to ask questions that she's going to save. And about a half an hour, probably about 5:30, we'll come back on and we'll have a big Q&A with you all, and she'll be running that. Okay, so Luke, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jane, and great to see everyone here. I'm going to start by making our land acknowledgement, our Equity Through Design mentorship land acknowledgement. We wish to pay respect to the many Indigenous peoples of New York whose ancestors have been here since time out of mind. We pay respect to their ancestors, past, present, and future, starting with the Lenape people, including but not limited to the Merrick, Canarsie, Rockaway, Matinecock, Munsee Lenape, and Six Nations, and acknowledge that this city and nation were founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples and cultures and stories. In addition, the foundation of the city and many of its original buildings were built and funded by the sale of enslaved people of African descent. Thank you for that. And now I'm going to pass it to Sharon, who's going to introduce our wonderful guests for today's session. And as she does that, I'm going to share my screen again so we can take a look at a few examples of their work. So over to you, Sharon.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. It's lovely to have you all with us this afternoon. So we have 7 people on our panel. I had to count that because I remembered and forgot it immediately. So I'm first going to introduce Gentry Akens, who is a production designer. Gentry Akens is an award-winning professional, multidimensional creative executive and leader in the world of entertainment design. His 40 years experience in immersive, interactive, and family entertainment design spans across a wide range of media and merchandising brands, specializing in production design and art direction for motion pictures, television, theme parks, theater, animation, and live entertainment. Amazing. Then we have Youlian Avramov, otherwise we can call him Yuli or Julian, and he's a graphic artist. I'm a graphic artist and motion designer with over 30 years of experience in branding and advertising. During my career, I have mentored many young designers, and I believe that sharing my skills is a great way to help bring and nurture diverse talent in our industry. And then we have Mark Chang, who is a graphic designer. Mark is a multidisciplinary artist and designer working and living out of Brooklyn, New York. He studied graphic design at the School of Visual Arts, graduating top of his class in 2009. Mark has worked the past 15 years as a creative director in the fashion industry, creating campaigns and designing showrooms for brands such as Quiksilver, Juicy Couture, Missoni, Stuart Weitzman, and many more. He has transitioned into film and television just over a year ago, and hopes to meet and collaborate with talented designers and artists in the film industry. Chris Minard, art director, Billions, art director. Chris Minard is an art director for television and film by way of set design for theater. His credits include the series Billions, The Americans, Daredevil, Veep, Jack Ryan, and the upcoming series Run the World and CG live action adaptation of Clifford the Big Red Dog. Lisa Myers, production designer. Lisa is a Brooklyn-based production designer with a passion for composition and story. She likes to focus on projects that are accessible, meaningful, and visually arresting. Recent projects include Gregory Crutzen and Eclipse of Marts, Modern Love Season 2, Awkwafina is Nora from Queens, Season 1, and The Last OG Season 3, Lost Girls, Luke, and Someone Great. Alejo Vietti, costume designer. Alejo is an Argentine native, immigrated to the US 23 years ago, has designed for Broadway and off-Broadway, the Radio City Rockets, national tours, commercial projects, regional theaters all across the US, opera, ballet, Ringling Brothers, and Barnum and Bailey Circus. and internationally as well. He is the recipient of the 2010 TDF Irene Sharaff Young Master Award. And Dara Wishingrad is a production designer, is a production and scenic designer, creates worlds for everything from film and theater to international sporting events. Some directors and producers that she has worked with include John Leguizamo, Boaz Yakin, Stephanie Lane, Alfredo De Villa, Frank Reyes, Mike O'Malley, Michael Urie, Nia Vardalos, Frank Whaley, and Charles Bush. And everyone has websites, so which you're welcome to visit. I think we could probably put those websites into the chat. So welcome everyone, and great to have all our panelists with us this afternoon. Look forward to hearing your fantastic stories.
That's so great. Thanks for the introductions, Sharon. So just a reminder, if you can keep your videos off for this section of the discussion, we're going to spend the next 40 minutes or so talking amongst our panelists about their work. And then we'll be opening up for a Q&A when everyone can turn their video on, and we can get some questions from you guys for our panelists. Remember to stick those questions into the chat where Elizabeth will be collecting them. And then also you can add questions later on too if things come up. So first question today to kick us off. What first inspired you to become a designer? What was that sparking moment when you were trying to figure out what you wanted to do with your life, when working in film, theater, television, or something else got you interested in design? Gentry's going to start us here. You can just unmute yourself there.
Yep. Mine is kind of weird. That's
the best.
Yeah. I was always drawing. I was, like probably most of us, doodling and sketching as a kid. In 6th grade, I was bored out of my mind. And the instructor was watching me doodle in the class. And she wondered if I could draw a picture of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. And if she liked it, she was going to put it on the bulletin board. Of course, I said I could do it. I drew Abe Lincoln and George Washington. She put it up on the bulletin board. And I knew then that there was something about the class going, ooh, ah, ooh. And people were, for the next week, were asking questions about where did that come from? So I kind of liked what it did. And it evoked dialogue and communication and conversation. And at that point, I knew I wanted to do, I didn't know it was called commercial design, but I knew I wanted to do something out there in the world that way.
What about you, Alejo? Tell us where it started for you.
I think the career found me. I think that passion was inside of me and I didn't know. I do remember always as a kid playing. I have these toys, there were little figurines called Playmobil, and I will put up plays with them all the time. And I will recreate, if I will watch a movie, I will recreate sets but I guess as a kid, now that I think, I kind of self-censor myself, because after I finished playing, everything that I made with cardboard and paper, I will kind of destroy it, throw it away, and then the next day I will start again from zero. And that was the case because after high school, I grew up, I am from Argentina, and I grew up in Argentina. I went to law school, and 4.5 years into the career, in Argentina, you don't have college. You go straight from high school to your career. So college is built in within the career. And my father asked me if I was happy, and I say no. He said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to design. And he told me well, then quit right now and start, go to design school. And that's what I did the next day. I registered myself, and then I went for another 4.5 years, and I graduated in Argentina. And then I moved to the US, kind of in a very weird way, without knowing. We were coming just to spend Christmas with my family, and I didn't know anyone, have no contacts, no papers to live or work here. I just told them, I'm not going back with you guys. And that's what I did. So I think that journey was kind of a kamikaze in a way, but I guess I was so determined to follow my dream after I have kind of repressed myself for so long, thinking that I couldn't make a living doing what I really wanted to, that I guess that propelled me to kind of be kind of have a tunnel vision and pursue this career.
Sorry, I was muted there. Some people in the group here have studied and gotten degrees in design or in undergrad or even graduate school, and other of you haven't. Does anyone want to jump in and talk about your journey in terms of like how you learned the skills that were important to get started in the business? Mark?
So I started out from a very young age designing or like creating art. I was taking art classes since I was a very young kid. My dad was like a very big fine artist in the family. So he always encouraged to always create, always create. So the only difference was when I decided to go to design school at SVA, I wanted to go for fine art, and he encouraged me not to because he was afraid of the similar struggle he went through of trying to become a fine artist. So I pivoted, and then I just fully immersed myself in just graphic design only. And then I went into the fashion industry, and then it evolved, and my path kind of took a little turn, and I ended up in the film industry now.
Lisa?
I studied, I always drew as a kid and painted and played music and all that kind of stuff. And then I studied art history and studio arts in school. And I think even all through college, I kind of had those fixed ideas of those jobs that you can have when you grow up. Like you can be a dancer, an artist, a teacher, a fireman. And so I was mostly studying art history. And so I kind of had this stream, this idea, this tunnel vision idea that it's like, okay, I'm going to work at a museum most likely, and which is what I kind of lined myself up to do. And then kind of answering your question before this one, I went to help out on I went to visit a friend for spring break to party my senior year, and he was actually working on a short film. And then I ended up waking up every day at like 4 a.m. to help out on that short film because I was like, oh my God, what is this? This is what I want to do. And that was my spring break of my senior year of college. So at that point, I'd already done it all. And I couldn't really go back and take other classes. So it was like, okay, well, what do I do now? How do I pivot to this new idea?
Dara, tell us about how you learned your craft and got your way into the business.
Well, it kind of happened by accident, actually. I, like many of us, spent my childhood drawing at my dad's side. He was a fashion designer, and we were always drawing. We would go to the park, we would go to museums. But I went to school for fine art and dance, and worked as a dancer and choreographer for many years. Number of injuries sidelined that career. And I had just moved to Miami Beach and literally answered an ad in a paper. They were looking for a design director for a brand new event company. And I said, oh, I can do that. And I interviewed and started out cutting foam core and applying glitter and creating these huge events for the city. And worked my way in as the design director for this new company. I took classes, in drafting, began to learn about I kind of backwards, but I began to learn about the whole industry. I hired people who knew more than me. I learned from my coworkers. I would draw, I would render, go out into the shop, help build and paint, and then load everything in. It was really from the bottom up. And then I was asked to loan my apartment and design a public service announcement for Make-A-Wish. And that was my first exposure to film and television design. And so it was a question of learning on my feet, because but all my training and everything that I loved, like doing dioramas in grammar school, really built up and helped me recognize my love for telling story, and that I was thrilled to find out that it was a viable career option.
Well, let's go to Chris and then Youlian.
My way in was as a kid, I was in love with animated films, animated movies, and especially fell in love with Sleeping Beauty. Ivan Earl did all these backgrounds and color styling for the whole movie. And I got very into that notion. So I actually wound up going off to art school to study animation with an intent of doing backgrounds and color styling. And then I realized that all of animation anymore is in a computer, and it bummed me out. So I kind of wiggled over. I had kind of an introduction to college life class, and the teacher there was the costume design teacher. And she kind of said, hey, try this thing out. And I wound up in the set design department working in theater. And one of the professors there was a designer who was based in New York. So between my junior and senior years, I actually came up here and worked as an assistant designer for him, and just kind of got my feet wet. And after school, got myself up here and weaseled over, I guess, into film and television design. Is pretty organic.
Youlian, you started with an interest in animation as well, right?
So I started in the beginning. I went to an applied art school, studying artistic wood carving, and I come from Bulgaria, Sofia, Bulgaria, and Bulgaria is part of Eastern Europe, and during that time we were still communistic country. We were behind the Iron Curtain. I loved doodling rock and roll stars and things like that when I was 12-year-old, 13-year-old. A friend of mine one day offered me, he said he's considering going to take some classes, drawing classes, prepping for an art school. And so it was so much fun to be with him, and he had excellent sense of humor. We were just being very close friends, and that's what drew me to go and even explore. Nobody in my family has anything to do with art. My father was an engineer, my brother an engineer, my mom is in finances, and so I was the only one who would go into a career like that. And so I got into this applied art school, which immediately I thought, when we started having this, drawing classes, sculpture, and all of these things along the design classes and the furniture engineering parts and all of the more applied side of the art, I was confident I would go into fine art. And somehow when I got out of the school, my first job was an art teacher. And in Bulgaria, art teachers were very poorly paid at that time. I think now probably is the case also. And I was supporting myself with designing jewelry. And some street vendors were selling my art. That was right after the changes in Eastern Europe. Russia, the Soviet Union fell apart, and everybody suddenly free economy, free competition. So it was very interesting time. I became very successful as a jewelry designer, but it didn't really draw me so much into that. Someone asked me to help them design some labels, and that's how I started exploring that. Because at school, I studied typography. I studied everything that one graphic designer might need, just didn't study. There were no computers back then. So that's how I was dreaming, actually. After the art school, I was dreaming to go into animation. And so that's a little bit of interesting. I don't have a college degree in what I do. When I decided to apply in the college, in the biggest school in Sofia, for animation and movie making, they actually didn't have specifically for animation that year. There was no there was no class because very few teachers, and so they couldn't take. And so that's how I kind of closely passed by. But I actually evolved into graphic design and got introduced to printing. Back then, printing was big, branding. And so that's how somehow after we came here in the US, similarly to Alejo, I got, when I immigrated here, I actually, not similarly to him, actually, I got a green card from the green card lottery before I came here. So my path was much easier than his. But here, I never stopped learning new things. So I think this was how I got really to do what I do today. It was a very long process, but it just sparked like dream of becoming a fine artist, which didn't happen, but a lot of other things happened.
Thanks so much for sharing that. You were mentioning some of those jobs you took when you were first starting out. I'm curious, what other jobs, people remember what their first job was that they got paid for, working in the arts, maybe how much you got paid too. And also, what was your side hustle? Like, how'd you make a living during those first few years that might have been a little tougher before you broke in and established yourself in your career? Mark's jumping in.
So I guess the way I got into actually getting paid to do design, it was like a one-step process. And the first was a handbag company was having a handbag sale in Union Square, and they needed someone to hand out flyers. So this was my sophomore year of college, and my job at the time to support myself was to work for an HVAC company in the city. So I was going around cleaning air conditioners at retail stores, climbing in the roofs, cleaning toilets, things like that. So then I started handing out flyers in like the dead of winter, trying to sell women handbags. And I just kept selling myself to the people that worked at the handbag company. And then eventually the art director there was like, you know what, we need a part-time designer. Do you want to work here? And then he gave me an opportunity. And this was like before like minimum wage was decent. So I was getting paid maybe like $7 an hour or something like that. So it was really tough. I mean, I had to pay rent, and rent was like, for me, I think it was like $600 a month. So I was like barely scraping by with that little pay of working as a assistant for him. But I think it was well worth it.
Who wants to share next? Gentry?
You know, the first question was what inspired us to get into the world of art. But I never did say that where I started was in animation with the Hanna-Barbera Studios, designing Saturday morning cartoons and things along those lines. And that's going to lead to the money, which ultimately got me into having to create the world that the characters I created lived in. And that was my first exposure, a foray into understanding environmental spaces. For pay, that was $350 a week. That was 1980. It was $350 a week, and I had to be a member of the union. And I remember thinking that was like,
which union was that for that job? Do you remember?
I do.
We want to try to decode all the unions for the kids joining today. You know,
but it was 1980, and it was in off of Lancashire Boulevard. I think that's Hollywood or Burbank. I don't remember, but the union was there. That was the amount of money. I had just gotten married, and I thought I was rich and famous, you know, on my way to being rich and famous. But being a member of the union, I was pretty excited, and I thought that was pretty decent money for back then.
Yeah. Alejo?
I started in Argentina. I started in Argentina, and I remember that I was a big movie and theater buff. And funny enough, my first few jobs were working in radio stations and talking about like movies and theater and things like, until I actually
Really?
had in
You were like an on-air personality, Alejo?
I was not personality, but I had a bunch. I ended up having, until I left, a show actually Sunday mornings from 10 to 1 on like an affiliate of CNN in Argentina. But the funny thing
Did you
is,
have a radio name?
no.
Or you just Alejo in the mornings with Alejo? Yeah.
And I usually talk about like, it was like very nerdy, you know, talking about like movies and theater. And at the same time, actually, while I was in law school, I was a paralegal, and until I left. And when I went to design it, the first thing I designed was a Cinderella show for like a children, like kind of like community thing, and I loved it. And then when I came here, I didn't know anyone, absolutely anyone. I didn't have any contacts or anything. So I grabbed, that was the late 90s. So I grabbed the phone book. There was no Google or internet. I grabbed the phone book and I did, since I was such a buff and I had come to New York before, I knew the designers. I was familiar with the names. So I looked them up, all the ones that I admire, on the phone book, and I called them just like a cold call. And I asked for an interview, and that's how pretty much all of them, they agreed to meet with me. I wonder why. And then my first job, I was incredibly lucky, was given to me by Anne Roth. You know, she was just coming from winning her Oscar from The English Patient. And she gave me a job for like 2 weeks, and then she recommended me to a company in New York that made costumes. I had a huge storage of costumes called Eve Brooks at the time. And I worked in that company as in many different capacities through the years. But that's how I started, kind of like, she gave me my first push, and then I started bouncing from one way to the other. And but that was, you know, it was really, really interesting how like that, you know, she was the one that, you know, like answered the call and say, okay. And that was it.
The fun fact about Alejo, he's got a huge collection of soundtracks. How many soundtracks do you think you own?
Oh my God, like over 4,000 or 5,000. It's a movie score. It's just like the composers. I'm into the composers.
It's unbelievable, this guy. You know, who else wants to tell us about
We
their
have to
first
say that
job?
we have worked together many times. Look.
Yeah. Dara, what was your first job, Dara?
Yeah, I was trying to remember. But other than assisting my mother at Reader's Digest, the first job when I was in art school, I took a job with a company that did hand-painted pillows and vests. And I have no memory of what we were paid, but that inspired me. Later, when I left school, I started painting on t-shirts and clothing, and later went into making clothing and painting on them and selling those. I remember the first time I got paid for designing a film, and I was so excited, and it was a feature, and that was my first paid feature job. I had done a short or two before that, which was volunteer, non-paid. But I did want to say that I really never had much patience for doing something that I didn't either love or inspired me, or, you know, that I could connect with inside. So for example, working in the mailroom at Reader's Digest, you know, it's like, yeah, that's enough. But, you know, things like, you know, I sold ice cream for Ben and Jerry's on the street. I purchased and sold flowers on the street. And these were all very exciting and inspirational and engaging for me. When I was dancing, I always found a way to, you know, I was teaching. I also started doing graphics, also before it was computerized graphics. You know, I think paying attention to that spark inside and keep looking for what that feeling is, and following that. I always wished that I had more patience to do whatever, but it also propelled me into finding ways to always use my creativity and as a way of making a living, sometimes better and sometimes, not so great. But over time, everything has progressed and grown.
Does anyone else have thoughts on advice for our students about how to make those choices early on about which jobs to take, the ones that pay better, the ones that have more or artistic rewards or feel like an investment towards a future with a collaborator that you really wanted to work with? I remember it being a tricky balance when I was coming up. How have you guys navigated those questions? What's the right job to say yes to, and what's the job that you should say no, but no thank you? Yeah, Lisa.
I think listening to people talking about starting out, it's like, and we talked a little bit about this before, but that balance of needing to support yourself and also trying to pursue something. So I knew early on, even when I was starting out, that I wanted to be a designer, but I knew that I was going to have to work towards that. So a lot of what I did the first couple of years especially was I would take any job that was any kind of arts department related, because at least I was learning something, doing something close to what I wanted to be doing. And I knew that I could be learning from other people that paid anything. And I think, I remember thinking like $100 a day was like awesome. And then I would pair that with taking, a short that I would do for free that I knew, some Columbia students were doing, where I would get to be the production designer. And that felt really good and special. But then I was taking the things I was learning from those other jobs back to that. And so I would bounce back and forth. And then, I think, but you kind of have to find that balance of, I think at first too, for the production design jobs, it was like, I remember like going to interviews for free jobs and like seeing another like young designer I knew, and we'd be fighting for the same free job with our like mood boards and everything. And so, I can't say I was that discretionary at that point, because even though a lot of those films didn't turn out good, but those were all really valuable experiences, and I learned something from all of them. I think for myself anyways, learning to be discretionary, and I'm still learning how to do that, is something that came over time, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Gentry and then Dara.
Dara can go first.
Oh.
Yeah, I wanted to address a little bit more the idea of volunteering or working for free. And
we should note, just so everyone remembers, the minimum wage in New York City is $15 an hour. So if you're working, especially if you're working for like a major corporation, you got to get paid that $15 an hour, and you shouldn't be working for less than that. Okay, that's my public service announcement for the day. Back to you, Dara.
Yes, thank you. Well, it wasn't $15 an hour when
Yeah, I know we all start to kind of old, don't we?
I was trying to remember what I got paid for painting pillows, and I feel like it was like, $3.50 an hour or something like that. But anyway, yeah, the thing about when you're first starting out, and as Lisa was saying, you do this volunteer work, you get to design a short film, and you learn quite a lot. You just have to mark that as you go along. You have to watch the signals inside and know how long you can tolerate working for free. I think as a woman, it's been a little harder for me to stand and set my worth, particularly in the indie or off indie world, where everybody's got a passion project and everybody's working for free. You have to note that in yourself, and learn to track your worth, your skill, and start to recognize when all this stuff that you've been absorbing, you get to a point where you're able to gather it all together and begin to put it back out. You have tangible skills, you have softer skills, and everybody will ask, want you to work for free, right? Less so now because there's much more of an awareness that it's not okay. But yes, mostly complete thought.
Thanks. Gentry?
I have a little bit of a different experience. I first of all, like all of us sitting here, I was really one of those crazy dreamer kids, and I wanted to do movies and I wanted to do it all. And so what I found myself doing was, in order to do that, I created an umbrella of the world of entertainment. And for me, as long as I navigated my way under that umbrella, I was staying true to the course and true to the dream. The other thing for me was that I tended to lean more towards the corporate approach. So if I wanted to work, in order for me to get into Hanna-Barbera, I did a little bit of homework and created a portfolio of what I thought Hanna-Barbera would want to receive. The long and short of it was that worked, I got in and made the money. From there, I wanted to work for toy design, and I created a portfolio. I studied and I worked for the Mattel was looking for an art director, and I created that portfolio. I got in there and I landed that job. That took me up to another level. And what ended up happening was I kind of hovered in that toy world, Mattel and Hasbro, where I became a director at a young age. And I was, at that point, it was $50,000 a year, and that was like in 1986-ish. And so what I did was I followed my dream, my heart and my dream. So for me, the next thing was, and I wanted to work with Walt Disney, and I want to do the parades, and I want to do everything. And I studied like crazy and created the portfolio that landed me my position at Walt Disney World. And again, each time that was taking me up the ladder to a whole new level of income. The first time I landed my opportunity in television was the all new Mickey Mouse Club was there when I just happened to be walking on the studios, and I was like, oh my God, the Mickey Mouse Club is here. I want to be an art director. Had never done television before, but I had a solid understanding of creativity and design and understanding of how all those things worked. And so I created a portfolio, designed some sets, just used my imagination and went in for the interview. I did not get the job as the art director, but they did hire me as the prop master. So I'm not going to do my whole career thing, but what I'm trying to say is that with each one of those steps, I was going incrementally up exponentially every step of the way. So I never experienced the working for free thing because I just strategically took that route in the world of corporate life, and that worked for me. And by the time I got to doing series for Nickelodeon and motion pictures, I was at a level where I was reaching. We all know what those salaries are. So that's been my experience.
Thanks. That's amazing. Sometimes, when you're a young person, you hear this advice: fake it till you make it. What do you guys think of that? Is that a good piece of advice for people? And is there a difference if you're a man or a woman about fake it when you make it, or if you're a white person or a person of color in that way? I'm curious what your thoughts are on it. Mark?
That was something very early on. That art director that gave me a chance as his assistant, that was a piece of advice he kind of showed me. We were in a situation there where he had another graphic designer working for him, and it was him. But it was a pretty small operation, and they did everything in-house. So he was teaching me all these things. things I didn't know. And one of the things he said was, if you get offered a job doing some type of graphic design or art directing a photo shoot, or whether it's going to be casting models, and you don't know how to do it, he goes, tell them you've done it before and take the job. And he goes, figure it out after, do your research, do your homework. If it means staying up 24 hours before the day that you have to go do it, he was like, do that. But he was like, say you could do it and knock it out of the park. Because he was like, he goes, learn while you're doing it. And he was like, don't be ashamed. And he was like, it's the confidence and to believe in yourself and your abilities and to ride with it. And I've done that in numerous jobs where people will ask me if I can do it early on in my career. I'll just be like, yeah, of course. And I have no clue. I don't even know what they're talking about sometimes. And I would just say it. I'd be like, yeah, of course I could do it, you know, and you just figure it out.
Chris, what do you think?
It's funny you ask. It took me a hot minute to get into film and television because of the theater thing first. I got my first job as a PA when I was 27. And a month later, I had already scheduled my interview for the union, the exam and all that stuff. So I had all this stuff lined up, but I was 27, I'm a PA. And before I turned 29, I was actually art directing my first TV show. I was art directing The Americans. So that was, I mean, the phrase trial by fire was hardcore. So yeah, I faked it till I made it there. But the thing was, I had a designer that I worked with in the summer. The Americans started in the fall, so I had a designer I was working with as a set designer in the summer, and there was no one to be found that she wanted to do this thing with, and she just looked at me one day on set and said, "Do you want to come art direct this thing?" And I said, "That's a lot of responsibility." So I was a little bit more hesitant about it, but she was willing to essentially mentor me. And she said, "I'll show you what you need to do. We'll get you good." I happen to have a very good producer, but before I turned 30, I was art directing out of nowhere.
Chris, can you just break it down for us for a sec? You were working as an assistant art director before that. Then you became an art director, and you were hired by a production designer to do that. What are those three jobs? What does that mean? Those three jobs.
Well,
not everybody out there might know.
Sure. So PA is a production assistant. That's the way I guess a lot of people get into this, right? So you come in and your job is to kind of, in theory, keep a low profile. You order the lunch, you keep people running, you take care of receipts. It's the stuff that nobody really wants to do necessarily, but it's really what keeps the department running. Without PAs, we're in trouble. But it's the step above finishing school, essentially, and you're there to support, but also learn. Once you're kind of able to move up from there, an assistant art director in New York, at least, is the same as a set designer in a lot of cases. Assistant art director also covers graphic artists, but that's the next step up where you're interfacing with the designer to literally design the sets. You do all the drawings and whatnot. And then past that is art directing, which is kind of interfacing with all of the different people. So you're dealing with designing with the production designer, you're dealing with building budgets and managing the money as it comes and goes, tracking that. You're working with the construction department to build the set, the scenic department to paint it, the set decoration department and set dressers to get it all dressed and all the furniture in. And then chasing stuff with producers to make sure they're happy or not happy. It's kind of that point where you're wearing a lot of hats, both managerial and creative.
Thanks for breaking it down. That was awesome. A lot of times navigating these jobs, especially, well, really theater, film, both of them, they're often many, many hours a day, many, many hours a week, a lot of travel, very intense. It can be hard to figure out how to balance your family life and your work life, as well as like your career as a professional and like your artistic core, your artistic self. How have you guys figured out like what's the right balance for you, or what were some moments where you learned like, I need to make some guidelines for myself to figure out how to be a healthy and happy person and have a successful career? Or maybe nobody's figured that out yet. Gentry, take us away.
I was desperately trying not to, do all the talking. So I had my daughter when I was really busy in the world of television, was just approaching the teen years, and I knew about the time she was in fifth grade, getting ready to go into middle school. I started campaigning and looking for a full-time job, because at that time I was working in television, and we all know what that's like. And I knew that I wanted to be not a stay-at-home dad, but I wanted to have my 9 to 5 so that I could be able to be with her during those teen years. So I made a strategic choice to find that full-time opportunity, which is what worked for me. I had the steady income, and I knew that I could be there. I was at the PTA meetings, etc. So for me, I opted to look for a corporate position during that period, so that I could have a little more control of our family life.
Dara?
Well, I was very lucky because my first experience in design was this brand new company, and we started out very small, and eventually, very quickly expanded into doing things like the Super Bowl and the Ryder Cup tournament. But in the beginning, we were all figuring it out at the same time. And my daughter was also, young and going into middle school. Fortunately, where we worked was ended up being right near her high school. I did have a 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, but because I was learning and figuring everything out, there was many more hours involved in figuring out how to render, figuring out how to lay out the different events. And so I could stop work, I could pick her up, we could do the homework and we could do the homework and the dinner. And then I would go back to work in my room at home. And I would work many, many hours into the night, wake up, bring her to school, go to work, and that kind of thing. And I was working way too much, and I loved what I was doing, and I had so much enthusiasm and so much passion for it, and that carried me through. I ended up making myself very sick. When you think you can do everything, and when you want to do everything. And so I learned eventually to, I kind of call it like, taking rest in the midst of motion. I find ways in—
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's sort of like, it's almost like the still point of the hurricane, the tornado. It was actually around that time because I was living in Miami Beach and there were many hurricanes, and I could go out and walk the dog, when the eye of the hurricane reached us, because everything became calm. And that I started to apply that to my life. I think COVID has also given another really great lesson about that. I designed my first feature since COVID, and constantly I was telling people, take a break. I let everybody know we're taking many more breaks in a day. Go outside, breathe air, take your mask off, drink water. And that I did my best to remind everybody of that, but it's so important because your project is not going to benefit from you on fumes. But if you take the time to just breathe air, drink water, sleep for 15 minutes or an hour, and everything physiologically resets, and you're more able to meet the challenges. You find solutions that you didn't when you were running on said fumes, and super, super important. Wish I'd known that earlier.
It reminds me of how, like, sometimes when you're starting out, you can feel like you're on this race, like to get that next job, to get that break, to get to that next plateau or level in your career, with this feeling like at some point you'll be there and you'll feel comfortable. I remember once talking to a designer I really admired, very famous designer, I won't mention his name, who I assumed felt incredibly comfortable in his career. He'd done major films, major Broadway shows. He'd achieved everything you could achieve. And he was incredibly anxious about what his next job would be the next season. And a certain younger designer than him who he felt like was getting all the jobs. And I thought, wow, he's not satisfied. Okay, I got to figure out a way to get satisfied inside myself with work I do, because I'm not going to get it from a Tony or a great job here or a great award there. That's one of those I wish I'd known when I was younger. But I didn't really figure that out for many years. Alejo, I think you said that you had sort of a feeling about how to think about like these awards you get, or this sort of career success, and how it is different than your work or related to your work.
Yes, it was actually, I have to say that it was really beautiful to listen to Dara and Gentry, and you, Luke, as well, how these words will come to me kind of like one was option and the other was decision and the other was sacrifice. I think all of them are part of this, right? And because I feel like when we all of us, probably when we are young and we're starting, we are kind of caught in that kind of hamster wheel. And we keep doing it because we cannot make it stop. But I think it's very important to, make a pause and figure out, the next step. And one thing I learned early on, I think, or I'm trying still, is kind of like know how to differentiate between work and career, and work is what we do, what we always aspire, to excel on it, and what in a way kind of represents what we do. But I want to make sure that I don't confuse that with the career part of it, which is like the level of success, of achievement, of like reviews and awards and accolades and things like that. And I think very often, the two of them get very mixed together, and people feel like in order to arrive or have like a successful career, they put aside the work and they just focus on that. What you were saying, Luke, they feel like to have that sense of that they have arrived or achieved, they need an award, or they need to have a specific credit or that, and they kind of value themselves or that. I see it even with younger, like professionals, that now is about how many followers they have on Instagram and things like that. And I think it's important to kind of like know how to compartmentalize and know what your work is, what represents you, what your core is, what you do, and then your career, which is all the wonderful stuff that comes with it.
That's so great, Alejo. I want to just remind all of our guests, and then we'll jump to Julian, to start putting your questions into the chat so we can collect them for the Q&A session, which is coming up in a few minutes. Youlian, you want to riff off that?
Yes. So my experience is a little different. Similarly to Gentry, I thought I had figured it out at some point when I founded my own agency, and a couple of years later, my wife, who's also a designer, she joined me as a partner in the agency. So we thought this is great, because having your own business is stressful. It's the more you grow, the more difficult becomes, not because you get bigger jobs or bigger clients, but because you have more people you're responsible for. And so in our case, I realized that I kind of we failed in our strategy, becoming two of us involved in the same particular job. So that's probably the only thing I would, if I have a shot again to do something, I would probably do it slightly differently. Although as a creative team, I'm really happy, and kind of I've become so dependent on being together with my wife, because it's always great to have someone you trust next to you, and I guess being able to separate work life from your own life is important. It's just maybe it's a personal thing that I never found a way to turn myself off. Some of the best ideas I've came up with are in the shower in the morning, or just going to bed before I fall asleep, and that's the worst, because then you can't sleep. You can't fall asleep, and it's and the more interesting, not the more bigger the project, but the more interesting the project is, the more excited you become, and I carry that excitement through my entire day and night. So I have the feeling that it's something that each one of us has had to learn to apply a discipline, and bring and separate these two sides of life. But it's not always possible.
Lisa, can I throw you a question? This is one that Dara mentioned before. If I had known when I was younger, ... what kinds of advice would you give to the younger Lisa starting off as a production designer?
I came up, as I described, doing shorts and then indie films, and then I worked my way kind of into the union world with the help of Sharon Lamosky, actually, a mentor of mine. I think that there's this mentality of, it's almost like competitive, and this ties into what we were just talking about, of like, oh, you worked 10 hours, I worked 14. Oh, you worked every week last month, I haven't taken a vacation in 2 years. And I'm definitely guilty of that, more so when I was younger. I'm still guilty of it. I'm still working on it. And I think, actually COVID and this time has like triggered that back in me. I feel that fear coming back of like, oh my God, what's the next job going to be? I have to take the first thing that comes along. I would tell my younger self to, I think as an artist, and then as a production designer and being in a management position, we all struggle with this ego, and I think ego is healthy. Ego is part of our identity, part of our existence, but it's, I would tell myself to chill out sometimes. I think I had this idea because I wanted to be a designer, and part of that's being a manager. I had this idea of what a manager is, or what the head of the department is, and just like cool it on that, and just let yourself grow into whatever it ends up being for you, instead of trying to apply all these ideas of what you've seen or what you think it should be. I would say you run into the same people over and over again. So be nice to everybody. I have absolutely had someone that was a PA on something I did 10 years ago send me an email now being like, hey, I'm working for this production studio now. I'd love to send you this script. Absolutely happens. So, be nice to everyone. I show everyone the same respect. Everyone's on their own kind of journey. And it doesn't hoist you up to push anyone down. And the same goes for our peers. It's easy to get caught up in comparing your line in the sand to someone else's line in the sand. But, there can be a lot of support there. And I think if you go into it with that mentality, give forward, take back. So.
That's great. A lot of you now, this is going to be my last question before we go to Q&A. A lot of you now are in the position where you're hiring people, where you're giving people their first job or early job in their career. What are you looking for when you meet with somebody young starting out in the business? Gentry.
Without question, I'm a story person, like all of us here. Before we approach our design, it's all about the backstory, etc. But I look for inventiveness, sincerity. Um, I will put up a big banner that say "assholes need not apply." So I have to detect and feel that I'm dealing with someone who is balanced and is a cool person that's going to be fun to work with. And then I'll look at the portfolio. And when I look at the portfolio, I look for originality, and I don't care how strange it is. For me, the stranger, the better, because I want inventiveness. So I look for young talent who is eager, and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and just, now what? Now what? Ooh, yeah, ooh. I look for that more than I do the one that comes in with this beautiful, pristine portfolio, and it's all analytical, and it's all perfectly, and it's got the measurement, everything is there. And I'm impressed with it, but I need to know more, because I've worked with a number of people throughout my 4,000 year career, who were just sort of like just lumps on a log, just sort of no personality. And I'm that guy. Come on, everybody, come on. I'm that. And so I want that around me. And to thine own self be true. If you are a dreamer and you still haven't figured it out, I like you too, because you dream. So I've gone to colleges and looked at portfolio reviews, and I can just feel who's the type that will be inventive, and just totally organic. I love that. And a great attitude. The attitude is everything for me.
Yeah, that's a great response. Dara, can you hold it for that one for a second? And I'm gonna ask Elizabeth to turn on her video and join us. There she is, and take over to lead us through the Q&A. We got a little more than 20 minutes left here.
Great. Some of these have sort of been answered. So like the first one, Naomi had a wonderful question, but I think that it was just answered. It was, what's your best advice for people? This is from Naomi. What is your best advice for people getting started in your field? So if each of you wanted to hit that real quick, I know that, what's your advice on how they get started? I think you've all skirted it, but.
Can I say something?
Alejo, yes.
Hey, I think that is very important, as we all were talking, and I think if they were listening, I think they will get it, that besides, excelling what they do, I think it's very important that they learn how to polish their social skills. I think communication is key in what we do, know how to interact with people, how to react to notes or to demands or whatever it is. So I think it's really, really important that they have that in mind, to try to always kind of polish that social skill. So they know how to interview, how to present themselves. I mean, if they were listening to Gentry and how he reacts when he going to hire someone, it's maybe not, and probably all of us, less about that look at the portfolio, but a lot about how they communicate, how, is that reaction, are they proactive? I mean, I think we all look people who are nature, by nature proactive, that they have that driven passion.
Wonderful. Thank you. Would anyone else like to sign in on that?
I would like to
Advice? Yes,
say
sir.
one other quick thing, because I know that there are people out there that are shy, inhibited, and they aren't gregarious. So I would say to the young people I would say develop, this is really, I feel very strongly about thumbnail sketches. Mm-hmm. And even if you're not a sketch artist, learn how to do napkin notes. Be able to communicate visually, to sit at lunch, sit at dinner, sit in the backyard, wherever it is. I love it when someone can communicate to me as they scribble and think. Just think, and doodle. No matter how phenomenal you are on all the computer programs, everything that I start off with is a napkin note or some sketchy little thing. Just be able to tell, just to communicate. Alejo said it earlier, the communication skills. And for me, that is also visually, it means everything to me that you can be spontaneous.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment on that early skill? Are you, Youlian?
Yes. Um, I think similarly to what Gentry just said, the computer, to me, the computer is just a well-sharpened pencil. You have to really come up with your ideas, and the way to come up with ideas is to listen, to ask questions. And I will just quickly jump over to the other question about what I would look for in an interview is people who, number one, ask me intelligent questions. I mean, intelligent question was, scratch that, questions. There are no stupid questions. Asking questions actually allows you to understand what it is about you're working on. And in that, in the initial conversations, you get these ideas. At least for me, that's how it is. I sometimes come up with my best ideas as we're talking, and it takes a little time to develop them. Computer is just, I most of the 90% of the time I spent on the computer just because the type of my work, whether it's video, 3D design, or graphic design, I always go back to that doodling Gentry was talking about, and just thinking about ideas, not looking at screen. So that would be my advice.
Wonderful. And Dara?
Yeah, like Youlian, my reply is also going back to that last question. I look for enthusiasm, I look for eye contact, I look for organizational ability as evidenced in whatever materials are presented. I look for someone who can connect with whatever life experience they have to their dreams, to where they're going. And a willingness and an openness to learn, to ask questions, to, and again, it's the eye contact. It's really whether, and I'm a very, I'm very introverted kind of person. But I'm always looking for connection and that. So I'm looking for someone who will connect with the work, who have come in with knowledge. There's also another side that I've run into when working with new people that I did want to lightly touch on. And when we start to work, when we're in the midst of it, there's so much energy that's built up, right? And we start to fly on that energy, and it carries us through all sorts of different things. As you get into that mode, you want to maintain your grounding. You want to make sure you remember who you're working for and that you're referring back to them. You want to watch out for, that you're not stepping on toes or you're overstepping. You want to continue to ask questions of either the person who hired you, or if it's appropriate from, the person they're working for. So as your energy and your confidence is building, you want to remember to maintain conversations of discovery with the people that you're working for.
Thank you. Would any of the other panelists like to answer that question? We have many more questions, so just speak up. I can't see you all there. Okay, great. We had a wonderful, simple question here. What is the one skill you wish you had learned earlier? The one skill you had wished you learned earlier than when you arrived. Anybody have a feeling on that? Lisa.
Hey.
Hi.
I didn't study design, so I had no drafting skills. I wish I had had drafting skills. And you know, what I'll say for that is that I'm not a great draft person. I draft well enough to be able to do what I need to do to communicate. And I did end up teaching myself how to do that. But would have been great if I'd already had that under my belt. And there are so many different ways you can do it now. There's so many online courses, and you know, I think I used YouTube back when I did it. But so don't think it has to be at a school, but I do think that that was a skill that really helped me, and that you know, I use that for rendering now. I use it to communicate quickly. It's just really something good to have under your belt.
Wonderful. Thank you. We have a question here from Naomi, and any of you panelists who'd like to take this one. What has surprised you the most over the course of your career? Surprised you the most over the course of your career? Naomi would like to know. Maybe it was one special surprise, or maybe it was a series of them. I think some of you addressed how things surprised you along the way, but anybody?
I think one of the biggest surprises is, I guess, when you start out, especially when you're in school, is you set some career goals for yourself. And I was surprised how quickly those goals changed and morphed. When I started out, I thought becoming a creative director at a fashion house was going to be the pinnacle of my success. I thought that's what I needed to do. I'm going to do it. And then I worked crazy hours until I got to that point. And once I was there, I realized that's not what I wanted. And it wasn't fun anymore. And it was just, yeah, it was nothing that I thought it was going to be. And then it just kept evolving. So I think one of the biggest surprises really is that every career, your path is just going to be, it's just so organic that it could go left, right. You know, it could go completely downhill at moments, and you think you're never gonna find a job again, but you'll go again, you know? So I think it's just life really. It comes in and it really changes everything.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody else have any surprise they wanted to share? Dara?
I think it's this is also tied into wishing that I had learned earlier. Like Lisa, I didn't have a drafting background, so I taught myself that. But another important aspect is management skills, which, you know, we're not taught in art school, and we're not taught, you know, when you're studying dance, you're also not necessarily learning management skills, either personal time management or managing a department. But that's something you can investigate on your own. And usually the way we learn management are the way that, you know, from the people that we work for. And I've worked for some freaks that, you know, involuntarily I absorbed their management skills or lack thereof. So it's a soft skill, and it's a hard skill, and it's something that I think is really important to look into and learn along with all the other drafting and illustrating. And you know, like Gentry was saying, even if you don't consider yourself an artist, draw, sketch, look at things, just follow with a pencil to be able to communicate. It's all about communication, communicating your ideas. The world that you see inside, you're projecting it on the outside, and every single way you can find to do that, whether, you know, I don't know, improvisational dance or some, you know, different ways of communicating that. Discover all the ways to learn to do that.
Thank you, Dara. Anyone else want to say anything that surprised them in their career so far?
I'll add one. It's kind of a broader one, and it's less my career specifically. But you know, I'm one of the younger ones dealing with this thing these days, and I'm shocked every year how much our industry evolves and how big it's become, and how many unusual, 10 years ago that we are looking at doing now. I mean, the scale of our jobs has grown. The stories we're telling are changing and growing and evolving. The technology is growing. And it blows my mind. I'm 35. You know, I'm not that far removed from having a cell phone in my hand as a toddler. You know what I mean? But but it's really shocking. I mean, even for smaller things like a TV show, you wouldn't think that the technology that we're talking about using in a TV show, you know, that it's technology that 10 years ago was for $200 million movies. And now we're talking, it's easier to do a background out a window with an LED screen and post than it is to paint a drop.
Thank you, Chris. Chris, while I have you, Sierra had a question, and I think you've answered it, but would you like to add anything to the following? She said, for those who started in theater and branched out, how was that transition? What advice would you give to someone who's primarily trained in theater? And if you could address that, and then if anybody else wants to briefly comment. I think you addressed it, but
it's interesting, right? Because you think that they're really similar. They're really not. I mean, the scale and the scope, and just the fact that you're in a 360-degree environment all of a sudden. With theater, you're very fixed here, and with a TV show or a movie, it's everything. So it's a lot bigger. There are a lot more moving pieces, and there is a whole lot more before and after to think about. Theater, you get things up and running and the show's going, and then you close, you take it apart. In this business, and especially, you know, with the technology part, now we're doing pre-production where we're planning it all out, then we shoot the thing, and then there's post-production, and you have to be planned out for that. If it's a TV show, you're rolling through different episodes of series. So you're prepping something and it shoots, and you start prepping the next thing, and it's endless. So the machine for TV and movies is much different, but there's a lot of the similar languages, right? We still have to draft, we still have to have a grasp on color theory, you know, those sorts of things translate, but it's just a bigger, many more tentacled creature, I guess. And it's learnable. You can absolutely go from theater to television and film. That's the biggest thing, is don't be afraid of it. Just get in there and find a mentor, talk.
Find a mentor. That's excellent. That's what this is all about. This is great. One of our mentor group people has a question. James has a question. How much would you say that your education has played in your career? I think he means formal education, both from a skill set point of view and networking. That's a hard question, and we only have about 5 minutes. So if any of you have some brief comment on that, how much would you say your education? Alejo.
I just want to say something about that. I think it's very important, but I think I want to make something very clear. It's for everybody who's listening to understand that, like, the educational process never ends. And that's one thing that is amazing about what we do. Chris was just mentioning about how, you know, everything is evolving so fast, and you have to keep educating yourself with everything new. And at the same time, even when you are, you know, in transiting, you know, academic education, I think it's very important that you don't content yourself only with that. To me, it was very important to be proactive. I was very passionate about costume design, so I was really into it. To me, it was very important to know the work of the people who came before me. So I'm really still today, you know, I'm really passionate about that. So I think it's very important to understand that the education process never ends. And that's one of the things that keep feeding us artistically. You know, you constantly, you know, whether you are like doing research for a new project, whether it's, you know, like uniforms, or whether it's, you know, how a specific place look in a specific time, it's part of your education, and you build this like mental library that you constantly pulling from. So, and it's also at the same time the education that you have from directors, from these other designers when you start assisting. That's all part of the educational process. So to me, I feel like the whole thing, it's key, and I don't like to kind of break it apart specifically.
Thank you, Alejo. And would anyone else like to comment on that?
I just
Yes,
want to.
Lisa. Oh, sorry, you go first.
No,
Gentry, you go first, then Lisa.
I'll just say that the most when I got into television, it was the DP that taught me the most about understanding how to develop colors and how to put the scene to it. It went hand in hand. It was the greatest thing that I ever learned, was to listen to what lighting can do, which is different in theater than it is in television. So Alejo is absolutely right. Alejo, Chris, you just keep the willingness to keep learning.
And Lisa?
I just wanted to say, as someone who didn't study what I'm doing now in school, and keeping in mind that not everybody can afford to go to college, as much as I loved college, it was a special time for me in the sense that it gave me time to grow up, which I really needed to do. It gave me a deep curiosity and gave me the tools to kind of do research, and have the discipline to apply that research into writing papers and things like that. Those are the things I took away from school. I will say those are things that you can develop outside of school as well, and you should continue developing and continue having throughout your life and your career. But if you have the curiosity, you can find ways to learn.
Great, thank you. This has to be our last question, and it's a very interesting one. Abigail plans to go straight to the workforce after high school. What should I do? She said. Anybody want to tackle that?
I think Chris said it earlier, and a PA. I don't know if you have PAs in theater. I'm more television and film, but in the world of television and film, I would try to be a PA for as long as you can, so that you can soak it all up. If you're not going to go to 4 years of college, you need an education some kind of way, and that's on the job training. Start off as a PA.
And sorry, can I say something? One of the first things I always tell people: get a driver's license.
That's great. Would anyone else like to give advice to our wonderful high school person waiting to do the workforce? I have advice, and I'm not on the panel. It's just that if you're going to take a break, do reconsider getting further education later, because sometimes you can do a little work and then you'll find out what you want to do, and getting the extra education won't be bad. Chris, you had one more thing to say about that, and then we're going to go back to our host, Luke.
I just wanted to tack on to what Gentry was saying, which is that you get in there as a PA, and now all of a sudden you have your foot in the door and you can explore a whole lot of things. You don't just have to stay in that department. You may wind up being, God knows what, a producer, an editor. Once you're in there, take your time. And if you're not convinced, feel free to bounce around, try new things, because the hardest step a lot of times is just committing to the attempt.
Great. Before Luke talks, thank you, Chris, and thank you all the panelists for answering these questions. I just wanted to mention, someone just put in the chat, they reminded us about several programs. One of them, the Roundabout Workforce Development Program. That's a great thing for people trying to transition. And someone asked a very good question. What's a PA? A production assistant. So I answered that one. And back to you, Luke, and thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Just a little bit of transparent facilitation here for the panelists. Anyone who wants to hang out after we finish, we're going to just stay on this Zoom channel and do a little postmortem chill. So just to let you all know. But right now, why don't we say thanks by having everybody turn their video on and give a great round of applause to these wonderful guests who've joined us today. Really, really, really appreciate it. Yeah. This is our Zoom applause here. Yeah.
How many Well, everyone, look at flash your-
43.
Wow, there's a great gang today.
43 people today.
Yay!
It's so amazing to see all your faces, and I'll put a plug in for our next Saturday session, which I think is coming up in 2 weeks. Is that right, Elizabeth?
I
The
don't know.
23rd.
To
It's,
20
Saturday, yeah, Saturday the 23rd.
23rd. Thank you.
Saturday the 23rd, also at 4:30. Check your emails for the sign up list, and we're going to keep this rolling all the way through the spring. So again, thank you everyone, and enjoy your evening, enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, panel. You were wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, panel. You were great. I learned a
Thank
lot.
you.
There's always more to learn. Always.